Now, since it is Christmas, we thought we would give our viewers what they want, and we know what they want because they put it in the comments a lot, and that what they want is more Rod Liddle. So, as a Christmas treat, here he is, our health and wellness correspondent, Rod Liddle, who has a typically brilliant column in our Christmas edition about wokery. Rod, I thought I'd start by saying, because we have a bit of a debate in the office about whether to use the word woke, because on one hand it seems to have degenerated into a meaningless term of abuse, and on the other it's a very useful catch-all for a lot of the things that are most awful about the world. You clearly have decided you will use it, but do you know what I mean when I say that it's
I know exactly what you mean. It's an awful word, and it doesn't quite express what we mean when we say it. Progressive politics is one way around it. Identitarian politics is another way around it, though that doesn't quite get you into the decolonization stuff quite so easily, and the trashing of the nation's history. I mean, the reason I use it, and you used it in this particular piece, is that everyone understands it.
Yes.
Everyone knows what I mean. There are other words. Wank, for example, is one such. And I did once use that, but any four-letter word beginning with W, indeed.
Well, as you say in the column, it is not cultural Marxism, is it? Even though a lot of people, particularly right-wingers, like to say that it is.
No, I don't think it's anything to do with cultural Marxism. As I say in the column, Marx was... I don't have a huge amount of love for Karl Marx, but you could not argue him of being anything other than both an empiricist and a communitarian. I mean, those two things, he is rather famously both of those two things, whereas wokery and identity politics is kind of post-rational and has no time for empiricism whatsoever. And it's, of course, by definition, individualistic.
I suppose what people are getting at there is that they think it's a sort of it's on a mission to march through the institutions and destroy them all.
Yeah, it's the old Gramsci thing, sure, but they also mean that it's left wing. It's a bit like anyone who's accused of being right wing. Eventually, the comparison stretches back to Hitler. So it is with anything on the left. If you wish to denigrate it, you say it's Marxist. So that's about as far as it goes. I mean, there is some truth that the Frankfurt School, Horkheimer, particularly Habermas, Marcuse, there's something in there which feeds in without question to what we call wokeism, largely a sense of a disdain of bourgeois moral values and a dislike of any form of authority. And this injunction that one had to express oneself. Christ, has anything done us more damage than that, expressing oneself? So there is a little bit of that in there. But I also think, by the same token, there's a little bit of the Frankfurt, of the Chicago School of Economics in there, which was also very, very individualistic and did away with the notion of society. Didn't really agree with society, or thought it was something that one should stay away from if at all possible, and was about but that was largely about money. But nonetheless, it was very, very individualistic, and I don't think it's a surprise that both on left and right, the dominant ideologies post World War II have been away from the communitarian and towards the individualistic.
Well, and on that,
all getting a bit heavy, isn't it?
No, I'm liking it. I'm liking it. Yeah, you're explaining it very well. I'm learning a lot. But I mean, on the individualistic stuff, I mean, it's also, let's keep it heavy for a while. It's also about relativism, isn't it?
It's entirely. And I think it was Richard Hoggart who first, I first read, actually noticed this tendency in British life and Western life towards a kind of vapid and vacant moral relativism, and which you hear these days from skanks and morons when they say things like, "Don't judge me, don't judge me." Well, I will judge you, you skank. I will judge you. and you cannot stop me doing so. But no, you're right. It's a moral relativism. But I mean, more crucially than anything, what wokery is something which cannot be challenged because it's all based upon personal experience. It's my lived experience. That's my lived experience. And well, no, this is my truth. So it's something which you cannot challenge rationally or empirically, and it's very clear about that. I mean, it was the one of the boards which advises Britain's universities said it wished to get university teaching away from European-based rational discourse. I mean, they're very, very clear that it's not rational. And of course, when you look at all the different strands, the intersectional, all the strands of wokeism, many of them contradict each other. It's hilarious.
Well, one thing I did want to challenge you on slightly is that you say it's a
challenge.
Well, I'm going to challenge you. You're going to get offended. You say that wokery is a creature of affluence. Because nobody in Somalia or Chad gets terribly worked up if you misgender them. I wanted to ask you, Rod, have you ever tried to misgender anyone in Somalia or Chad? Because I have a sneaking feeling that they might be quite offended.
I don't think they would be at all. What I mean that was a way of capturing the fact that there is no wokeism in those countries, and there isn't. And you know there isn't. So don't sit there pretending there is, Frederick.
Okay.
Don't try and pretend to me that in South Sudan they're terribly worried about trans quotas for the next person to, become village elder and chop off someone's head. They are not bothered about that.
I think if you kept calling the village elder a woman, he might get quite cross. But anyway, I'm being facetious. So let's carry on.
You're being impish, aren't you? You're being impish.
Yeah,
impish.
Yeah. How dare I? Let's go on to religion, because that's an important part of your piece and your thesis, which is that wokery is a sort of, it has filled the void of religion, if you like.
Well, except it hasn't. I mean, it hasn't really filled the void because the thing which religion gave us was some easily understandable, perhaps simplistic commandments by which we ought to live our lives, as well as stuff like, the notions of deferred gratification, the benefits of working hard, the benefits of saving money and of doing good in this life. Religion gave us all of that, and we've retreated from religion. We're now effectively a secular country. I don't think wokeism has filled the void. I don't think anything has filled the void. And I spoke to Charles Murray, the sociologist, the American sociologist, a while ago. And he told me at the end of our conversation, he said, I'm very interested in Europe. This is a continent which has abolished God, and it would be interesting to see what they put in its place. And the answer is nothing, nothing at all. So I think the retreat of religion, or the retreat of us from religion, has been one of the things which has fed into the rise of wokery. There are many, almost infinite number of other things which have fed into it.
My father used to say that we have externalized, traditionally we used to externalize religion and internalize morality, and nowadays we do the opposite. Is it because we've been doing that for decades now that we have wokery?
Well, the causes of, as I say, I think the causes of wokery are many-fold, and touch on such things as the reform of the divorce laws, the movement of women into the labour market, the way in which we teach children in schools, the growth of human resources, the HR departments, the growth of health and safety legislation. All these things have fed into it. And my point is that we've kind of built wokery ourselves, and are now the recipients of it. So we only have ourselves to blame. In terms of, you're suggesting that these days we externalize morality.
Yes, so we put it on other people, but not ourselves.
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that. There's some truth in that. But what we've also done is the great mantra of the last 40 years is to remove stigma. So we try to remove stigma from people who have mental illnesses. We remove stigma from single mothers. We remove stigma these days from the morbidly obese. And the problem is that stigma is a useful societal tool for preventing antisocial behaviour. And if you remove stigma, as we have seen, the numbers of people who are morbidly obese or are single mothers will grow exponentially, and they have. I mean, actually, in the case of single mothers, exponentially in its proper term. So we cannot bear, this is part of the moral relativism stuff, which is we cannot bear to judge other people on their lifestyles because we're all individuals and society doesn't really matter. It's the Thatcher mantra in a way. So no one can be judged, and we can't say to them, you're doing wrong. You're doing something which will deeply harm yourself, harm your children, and harm society. We're not allowed to say that anymore.
Well, if it is inadequate as a replacement religion, do you think it will collapse quite quickly and that something else, possibly Islam, will spring up in its place?
Well, Islam has continued to exist as a consequence of its refusal to change with shifting morals, and in a way that the Church of England has tried to survive and is not doing so at the moment by accommodating new social morals. So yeah, I think there is, not necessarily Islam, but certainly if you look at the religions which are growing in this country, it tends to be the somewhat robust side of Protestantism. They're the Pentecostalists. Pentecostalists are thriving, and growing by the month, whereas the lily-livered Church of England is in kind of terminal decline, as is, sadly for me, a church which once did know about morality, and that's the Methodist Church, but it's also become very, very lefty and woke.
One thing you put a list of things which you've mentioned slightly there about things that have sort of contributed towards the rise of wokery. Yeah. The diminution of marriage and the reform of the divorce laws, the lack of an external threat to this country. I was very interested by that. That's.
I mean, if you know your sociology, right back to Durkheim, one of the first major sociological studies, Emil Durkheim's study of suicide, which tends not to happen when countries are at war. People tend not to kill themselves. There is a sense. The point being that there is a sense
they can go get killed somewhere else.
What? Yeah, they get killed in another way. Yeah, absolutely. But the point is that we'd emerged in 1945 from a war in which the overriding message was one of communitarianism, that we're all in this together, that we all fight together, that we do our duty, and that we're fighting for something rather noble. And what you tended to get is much less mental health, much fewer mental health problems amongst the population, fewer suicides, a greater sense of togetherness, a greater sense of pulling together. Whereas the generation which follows that, which is both the boomer generation and indeed the Generation X and Generation Z and the millennials, haven't had that. I mean, to a degree, the boomers had a kind of existential threat hanging over their heads in terms of nuclear warfare, which produced a slightly different response to actually being bombed. The fear of being bombed is different to actually being bombed, I think. But no, I think because we've been safe, I'm not suggesting that we should have a good war, Freddy, or anything like that, that would do it. I'm just saying, any more than I'm saying that, we shouldn't have had women into the workplace. I mean, that it would be an absurdity to say that. What I'm saying is that these things have in their own way contributed towards a more individualistic society and a woker society.
Do you think it might explain why we're perhaps lusting after a threat, which might explain some of the pandemic response possibly the sort of almost bizarre wish that Putin was posing a nuclear threat. A nuclear threat.
Well, I think there's a few things probably not associated with wokeism going on with Russia. Partly, I think it's a sense of comfort amongst the military establishment and to a degree the politicians that we're fighting an enemy we understand once again. Whereas, previous to that, our biggest threats seemed to come from radical Islam, and we didn't have a clue about how to deal with that. So I think there's a degree of comfort there, and also a slight smugness that actually the Russians aren't very good, despite their history. So I think that's there. I think there's also something which kind of touches on what you were saying, that Slavoj Žižek often says, and said about smoking actually, which is that we have outlawed racism and sexism and homophobia and Islamophobia, but we still need someone to hate. And Slavov suggested that smokers were one of them, and I think he's right. I think that's an easy thing to hate, but I think for wokery, some of it is down to a middle class which isn't allowed to hate anything else and thinks it's rather bad to hate things. At least they can hate the lower classes with their awful, awful views about things such as transgenderism and immigration.
Rod, that's been a very jolly section, appropriate to Christmas.
Happy Christmas, Freddy.
Happy Christmas. Thank you for putting on tinsel. That's all our viewers could have wanted. Thanks again, Rod.